Dragonlance, Dragons of Winter Night by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman, published in July of 1985, Volume 2 of the Dragonlance Chronicles. The Dragon High Lord Verminard has been defeated by the heroic companions led by Tanis, half-elven, but the Dark Queen yet moves from strength to strength, her draconian and draconic armies still threatening all of Krynn. Tanis's group is broken in a dragon ambush, and Sturm Brightblade and the elven lady Laurana find themselves separated from their leader. Together, they must navigate the fraught politics of elven tribes and ancient orders as a great army of evil, unconcerned by divisions between and amidst humans and elves, bears down upon them. It's freezing in here. I don't know why I'm so cold. It's the middle of August. Oh yeah, it's because I'm reviewing the second volume of Dragonlance Chronicles. Dragons of Winter Night by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman. Now, I kind of half poked fun at, half loved on the original Dragonlance novel, Dragons of Autumn Twilight, for being, let's just say, the pinnacle of generic fantasy, by which, you know what I mean, elves, dwarves, wizards, dragons, magical MacGuffins, you know, the whole nine, and that don't change none here. It would be weird if it did. I think that a lot of, fans of Dragons of Autumn Twilight back in, 1985 would have been pretty put off if they had opened up its sequel to discover some, art house deconstructionist take on the epic fantasy genre. No, if anything, I would say that Dragons of Winter Night actually kind of doubles down on certain aspects of the generic fantasy pie. In particular, I'll make note of the magical MacGuffins. The first book had a couple things like that. Of course, it had the blue crystal staff of healing possessed by Goldmoon, which was kind of the driving force, or I should say the kicking off force for the entire plot, basically, and the discs of Mishakal, I believe they were called, that the heroes sought in a dungeon at the beginning of the first half of the book. But no, now Dragons of Winter Night goes full on, Legend of Zelda style, collect the sacred orbs to access the final dungeon style with the dragon orbs, which much the plot of the book revolves around collecting. And in a lot of ways, I think we can probably admit that MacGuffin hunting is probably the lowest form of fantasy itself, may be considered on the lower end of genres of literature, so maybe we're at the low end of the low end here. It's called video game style plotting for a reason, when we're looking to collect magic orbs or magic crystals or magic swords to advance the plot. But I think if you pick up a book called Dragons of Winter Night with this particular cover, you pretty much, you know what you're getting into. I think you probably preemptively accept that you're not reading, Faulkner or Dostoevsky here. So I think that criticizing it for that is, it's a little bit like criticizing a cow for mooing. It is what it is. It comes with the territory. Either it's your thing or it's not. If it's not, you're probably a more intelligent reader than I am. So I wish you well in your journeys through the halls of great literature. But now let's talk about some motherfucking dragon orbs, bitches. But that's not to say that Dragons of Winter Night doesn't solve a few of the first book's problems. Actually, it solves what for my money might have been the single biggest problem with Dragons of Autumn Twilight, particularly as we got into kind of the latter half of the book, which was the just ludicrously outsized cast. I mean, it already had a pretty big cast in the first half, with 8 members in the party, Tanis, Flint, Goldmoon, Riverwind, Tasselhoff, Caramon, Raceland, and Sturm. That's already a pretty decent-sized party. But then as we got toward the end of the book, we had who joined the team. We had Laurana and Gilthanos, the elf siblings. We had Eben. We had Fizbon, the wizard. I swear I'm forgetting at least 2 or 3 others there, and it just became comically, ridiculously huge. Particularly, there were quite a few times toward the latter half of Dragons of Autumn Twilight where something would happen, something dramatic, and then we would spend the rest of the page elaborately describing a dozen different reactions to that thing, and it just became completely unworkable and unsustainable. But nope, now here we break up the team, and that itself goes back. That's a classic fantasy trope as well. That goes back 30 years before this book was published, to the breaking of the Fellowship at the end of Fellowship of the Ring. and it is very, very good for Dragons of Winter Night in all ways that they do this. It improves the basic readability by getting rid of what I talked about, those just overly giant scenes of descriptions to events. It allows us to do deeper dives into characters. It allows us to kind of keep things fresher as we read by intersecting between storylines to some extent. It's less visually silly in your mind's eye, and that's important. There were scenes in Autumn Twilight where we're supposed to accept, the mental image of over a dozen people sneaking into a dungeon together, and it played as silly. So I huge thumbs up for the breaking up of the group. I think that was absolutely the right choice for this book to make. What is a bit surprising is that it's not really a very even split at all, screen time wise. I figured while I was reading the book, like the first volume, Dragons of Autumn Twilight, this one is volume 2. It's broken up into now 3 books. We got book 1, book 2, book 3. And as we got into book 2 and kind of followed along with Sturm and Laurana and Flint and Tasselhoff's party, I kind of figured, okay, we're going to be doing an alternating chapters thing, totally a common fantasy trope, especially these days. And then we'll pick up with Tanis and the twins and everyone in the next chapter. Then we kept doing more and more Sturm and Laurana chapters, and I was like, okay, so here's what they're going to do. They're going to do a thing like Tolkien did with Two Towers and Return of the King. We're going to have book 2 all Team Sturm, book 3 all Team Tanis, right? But no, actually not at all. Even when we get to book 3, we're still just doing occasional little check-ins with Tanis and the twins and crew. No, this is very much Sturm and Laurana's story. And some characters, it's, even less their story than Tanis's. Goldmoon and Riverwind in particular. I mean, Goldmoon played a huge, huge part in the plot of the last book, the last volume, sorry. She was kind of the impetus for everything. She was the driving force for it. She was the one who brought the blue crystal staff, who sent, the team off on this whole journey. But no, now Goldmoon and Riverwind, they're shunted all the way down to borderline cameo status. You will completely forget they exist, pretty much for vast stretches of a winter night. And I wouldn't go quite that far with Tanis and the twins and so on, but they definitely aren't the main characters anymore either. Though we do get one kind of funny scene where Caramon is very conflicted about whether or not he wants to bang his girlfriend, the red-headed barmaid Tika, who we met very early on in the last volume. And it's just like, man, shit, you might die in this war any day now. There's dragons coming for you, man. There's dragons coming. Just do it. Just bang the girl, be happy. Get married first if you need to. Just get it done, man. It's the same thing with Riverwind and Goldmoon in the last book. I don't know why everyone in this book is so obsessed with doing it after marriage. Y'all are gonna die. There's dragons coming. You're gonna die. Just get it done. Make it happen. You know what I'm saying? But no. From about page 140 or so on, this novel belongs very firmly to Sturm, Brightblade, and to Laurana. I have to give Laurana in particular credit. Last book, I very much she joined in the second half of the book, and I definitely kind of grouped her in with the the hangers-on of the group, because it seemed to me like her entire arc in that book, if you could even define it as that, pretty much revolved entirely on plotting on how to get Tanis Half-Elven's dick in and around her vagina. But no, she steps it up here in a big, big way. In fact, you'd almost argue that she steps it up maybe a little too much for believability in terms of her just what a great archer and warrior and leader she becomes so quickly from kind of the, pampered, aristocratic elf maiden living in a golden cage or a golden bubble she was in the last book. But it all works out really well. And actually, I would say that her growing divide from elven society is actually more interesting than the way they tried to explore with Tanis in the first book, because, Tanis already was half human. He already felt distant from them even years before we met him at the beginning of Autumn Twilight. He had this support system of friends to fall back on, whereas Laurana has grown up her whole life in this elven society. She is of them, and now as she kind of finds herself cut off not from, her people in an abstract way, but from her people, her direct family, her father cutting her off, telling her she's becoming, human. And she doesn't have as much of an outside support structure. So, it's someone being it's a riches to rags story. Basically, she was a pampered princess, and now she's in the muck and the dirt fighting draconians and dragons. So it's an interesting thing, and yeah, she steps up in a big way. I had no idea reading the first book that she was going to become this major of a player. And the elves, I'd say they're much bigger pricks than they were in the first novel. You know, in the Autumn Twilight, they felt more kind of Tolkienian. The towns we visited, the elf town, felt, you know, very kind of Rivendell meets Lothlorien. You know, they were a little snooty, but basically, you know, the good races category. But you know, here they become quite a bit more malicious. Actively kind of antagonistic towards those they see of the lesser races, humans and others. More contemptuous and you know, quite hostile actually towards those who disagree with their plan for the dragon orbs. Elves actually do play the antagonist role for a good part of the book, especially the middle two, the book 2 of the 3. And you know, elves are usually quite firmly in the good category, so I thought this was an interesting. It was a little bit different of a way to do it. And Sturm Brightblade's arc is interesting too, as we finally meet the Knights of Solamnia that he's a part of and spoke of so reverently and with such love through the first book, with, you know, their chivalry and their code of honor and their ancient traditions and you know, their cool name. And you know, it turns out that they're actually just a bunch of like squabbling politicians and just bureaucrats and just schemers and who are far more interested in kind of like backstabbing and, you know, playing against each other than really doing good in the greater world. And you know, I can relate to the Sturm's growing disillusionment here. I've certainly had, you know, movements and causes I believed in, you know, turn to shit in my mouth throughout the course of my life. And, you know, it's interesting to watch Sturm kind of undergo the same thing while hoping that he can lift the Knights of Solamnia up from within. You know, hoping against hope, as it you know, increasingly turns out. And if there's a third most main character, I mean, beyond when the group splits up, and I'll go more into their splitting up later, but if there's a third most main character beyond Lorana and Sturm, I would say it's definitely a Tasselhoff, the kind of a mischievous, vaguely hobbity, vaguely leprechaun-y Kender who travels with them and, you know, always making mischief, always stealing things, always getting into some shenanigans or other. And these shenanigans do, on occasion, you know, end up shifting the plot in different directions, particularly something he does with a dragon orb at one point. But it doesn't deep dive into his character quite as much as it does with Sturm and Lorana, his you know, inner conflicts, his inner demons, his growth. He's pretty much just kind of the same mischief maker the whole time, but he plays a relatively important role in the story. Of course, there are a decent number of new characters here and there, but I want to particularly highlight 2, both kind of mostly part of Sturm and Lorana's whole subplot. I shouldn't even call it a subplot, it's just the plot of the novel, you know, past a certain point. But I want to highlight 2 new characters, Derek Crownguard, who is a Knight of Solamnia, and Silvara, who is an elf maiden of the Caglanesti, I believe they're called, the Caganisti. It's kind of a wild offshoot tribe of elves who the snootiest of elves don't even consider to be elves at all. So Derek Crownguard is sort of, you might call him the kind of dark side version of what Sturm could have become. You know, think the man with the golden guns, a relationship with James Bond. He's sort of he's so rigidly adherent to the code and the rules and the measures, the Knights of Solamnia, that he's lost sight of goodness and basic common sense and just kind of become a, you know, a hen-pecking, rule-following prick, basically. This kind of makes him gradually more and more villainous by default through the novel, despite technically being on the same side as Sturm. I would say they actually make the wrong choice to kind of cheapen this toward the end of the novel by making him become sort of a little more explicitly mad. They even say in the text of the novel, you know, Derek has become his growing madness. He's become mad. And I didn't actually like that choice. I thought it was more interesting if he was terrifyingly sane, so to speak, in his adherence to the rules. So, you know, a little mix there, but he worked as kind of a villain who's on the same side as our heroes. And then there is Silvara, whose entire plot feels like it was conceived during a contest to plot out a character arc, well, just blackout drunk, and then use your arc verbatim when actually getting around to writing the novel, because it makes no sense, man. It makes no sense. Okay, so get this. First, we meet her as the crew kind of rolls into this elf town, and she's this very demure, very shy little elven servant girl who goes by the name of Silvart, right? And then it turns out she's actually this more rebellious type girl named Silvara who helps them escape, right? And then she's kind of demure and shy again. She has this nice little romantic subplot with Gilthanas where he falls in love with her almost immediately after seeing her boobs, which we also see in this character portrait. So that's pretty cool, I guess. But then it's revealed that she's kind of a scheming magic user. But then she's on the good side of the heroes again. Then she's suspicious again. Then they like her again, then they don't like her again. And then it turns out she's not even an elf at all, but she's a entirely different type of magical being. And it's comically, ridiculously all over the place. That it lurches from one thing to the other so erratically and from chapter to chapter that it's so silly. It's quite comic. There's can't look at her as we first meet her in the novel and as we last meet her and draw like any kind of coherent arc from there to there. It's a little ridiculous. Now, I've mostly been discussing character here and haven't really talked plot much at all, and to be honest, that's because the book doesn't really have that much of a plot. It's not really driving toward, a central goal like the first book was, with them, gradually moving toward their confrontation with Verminard, or even going after the discs of Meshakal. This is definitely more just kind of a various stuff happens book. Not so much clear-cut goals laid out. People will talk about whether fantasy authors are architects who will create, elaborate and careful blueprints for where they want their novel to go, possibly down to a scene-by-scene level before they even start writing, or gardeners, with, George R. R. Martin being a famous example of the latter, who will, just plant the seeds of plot and character and find out where they grow as they write. And, correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't interviewed the authors or anything about it, but this definitely feels like a gardener book to me. Even the driving force for the, relatively little amount of true plot the novel does have, the dragon orbs, it feels like the author's interest in it kind of waxes and wanes a little bit from section to section, from book to book of the novel. For example, there's this one major journey into basically an ice dungeon to fight the evil elf magic user Thielthas for his dragon orb that instead of going into in what I imagine could have been 30 or 50 pages of adventuring, they instead make the choice to sum it up in a couple pages of song written out in kind of a poetic, like, lyric form, basically skimming over it. A bizarre little choice that I've never seen anything quite like before in a fantasy novel, I don't think. And in this case, I don't mean bizarre in like that was so interesting in a different way. I mean bizarre in kind of the way that I found it a little bit off-putting, to be honest. But there may be a little bit less plot, but there is still an inciting incident. A little ways into the novel, maybe a quarter or so into the novel, a little less, maybe a fifth of the way in, with the dragon firebombing of the city of Tarsus, where the characters currently are, which ends up splitting them in different directions. As just a little throwaway side note here, there's this bit where they're going to Tarsus under the belief that it's a harbor town they can get a ship in, right? And then they find out that it became landlocked in the Great Cataclysm 300 years ago. 300 years ago, I realize there's no internet in this world. They can't, get a cell phone call about the current state of Tarsus, but they do have flying creatures, not just the dragons who are bad, but people fly Pegasuses and griffins and all manner of stuff, And in any instance, this town is basically walking distance from many other, because they do walk to it. It's walking distance from many other major towns in this world. And 300 years now it's been landlocked, and it's like this big surprise. Do you know how fucking long 300 years is? That's longer than the entire existence of the United States of America. And no one at some point walked by this town that's like a couple hundred miles away and is like, hey, there's no harbor here anymore. 300 years, really? But beyond my little possible plot hole gripe there, the actual firebombing of Tarsus sequence itself is well done. I kind of was looking things up about this book. I read that the authors kind of studied, books and documentaries about the real life firebombings of like European cities and towns during World War II to get the kind of logistics and the feel and the atmosphere and everything of this, right? And it's pretty well done with the heroes, running down alleyways, cowering in basements, hiding, the general screaming and chaos. And, I would assume most real World War II bombings didn't end with, the French villagers being saved by griffins, but, I could be wrong. I'm not an expert. Beyond that, the story mostly consists of what I previously talked about, hunting down dragon orbs and dealing with haughty elves who want the dragon orbs and, rigid orders of knights who want the dragon orbs and the various shenanigans of Derek Crownguard and Silvara, the ever-shifting elf maiden. And it all kind of builds towards a final battle type scenario, albeit one that comes on fairly suddenly and without a ton of build-up, but we'll get into that a little more when we talk about spoilers at the end. Now, the book is more character-focused than plot-focused, particularly on Sturm, Brightblade, and Laurana. But actually, one of my favorite chapters in the entire book, it could be my favorite chapter, doesn't involve them at all, and it's the very first chapter of Book 3, our first time checking in with Tanis and company in quite a long time, and it's called The Red Wizard and His Wonderful Illusions. And this chapter basically shows Tanis, Caramon, Raceland, Tika, Goldmoon, and Riverwind all stuck in kind of this little harbor town together with no money. They dead broke. They can't afford shit, man. And so then Raceland, our mysterious, epic, dark wizard who sacrificed his body and health to win his unfathomable magical powers at the Wizarding Towers. Basically, wins coins off of the common folk who watch him do these cheap little illusions where he makes things disappear and makes little images appear and stuff. So it's pretty funny because he's up to this point he's been the dark wizard. Very glowering, very mysterious, but now he's just, he's doing magic tricks. He's doing magic tricks to make a buck. But that's not where it stops because then the book kind of montages basically through a whole month of the entire team in this town, and they develop the Red Wizard and his wonderful illusions into basically a road show where Raceland is doing more and more magic tricks, right? But needs a little time to rest between them, so they have side shows. Caramon performs great feats of strength. Tika dances. Goldmoon sings, and it basically montages through a month of all this until they have well enough money to rent a ship and re-equip themselves and get some food and travel on and get a carriage and so on and so forth. It's very comedic. It's very silly. It's very lighthearted. But it's a nice break in the tone. It's the sort of thing that, like, if this was a TV series, I could see people both loving and hating this episode. Some people love it for how different it is and how amusing it is, and some people hate it to find it campy and think that it cheapens Raceland. Put me in the love camp, though. I dug it. It was a real good break in tone from what had come before it. And then after that, Team Tanis abruptly mostly disappears again, only appearing in 3 more chapters for the rest of the book. And, I'd be curious to, if I could talk to a fan of this series, a fan of at least the first book 35 years ago, and find out what they thought about this. If they opened up Dragons of Winter Night hoping to read the continuing adventures of Tanis Half-Elven, were they disappointed? Were they, could they roll with it? Did they find out they liked it better this way? I'd be interested to see what people thought back when this book was new. I'll discuss 3 more specific plot points after a little spoiler break, but I guess before then, quick overall thoughts on the book. I honestly might have to say I enjoyed the first Dragonlance novel a little bit more. It had a bit more of a spirit of kind of high adventure to it, I guess, whereas this one feels a little bit glum and claustrophobic in comparison, minus maybe the illusions chapter, but it seems like our characters are constantly captured or imprisoned or on trial and all that. And the book also kind of feels a bit haphazardly plotted, as I've previously discussed. But like I said, I did approve of splitting the group up and the deeper dives into Sturm, Brightblade, and Laurana. Laurana in particular really steps up to the plate here and is developed well enough that, she feels ready to go. She feels like she could, launch off from this point and become the protagonist of her own novel or her own, series of novels. And, I guess there's 5 billion other Dragonlance novels at this point, and I know very little about them. So maybe that's actually happened. I have no idea. Wouldn't surprise me one bit if it had. So overall, I don't really do scores generally on this channel, but, I would give Dragons of Winter Night kind of the same 6 to 7-ish out of 10 that I'd probably give Autumn Twilight. And, looking forward, I guess, to reading Dragons of Spring dawning soon enough and finding out where things go from here. But before then, let's go into just a little bit of spoiler talk. First off, the reveal that the flighty wizard Fizzbon, dun dun dun, survived the events of the first book. Wasn't exactly a hard one to see coming, seeing as how kind of weird and nebulous and not really shown his death and Verminard's castle was in the first book. But I have to say I thought this was pretty lame and I wasn't that into it. Sorry if there's any hardcore Fizzbon fans out there who don't like me saying that, but the impermanence of death is long been my number one kind of pet peeve of the entire fantasy genre, even surpassing the Chosen One, which probably my second most major pet peeve. But yeah, and this one just is a straight up example of that. It didn't ruin the book or anything for me by any means, because like I said, I did basically see it coming, but I guess you could say it left me a little nonplussed. And spoiler number 2, the reveal that the Dragon High Lord they've been fighting throughout this book is in fact Tanis's ex-girlfriend, Kitiara. And I have to say this reveal actually worked a good bit better for me than the Fizzbon one I previously talked about. I didn't see it coming, I didn't know about this. It's not Dragonlance hasn't, it hasn't had that pop culture osmosis, where you hear about this kind of thing. And yeah, I didn't know about this. I didn't see it coming, and it worked for me. And now when you're rereading the first one, if I ever do, when Tanis at Half Elven is reminiscing about his exes, Laurana and Kitiara, both now have kind of distinctive characters, distinctive character types, distinctive roles in the plot. So yeah, that was pretty good. And the third big spoiler, of course, the book's ending, the last stand and heroic death of Sturm Brightblade atop the High Clerist's tower, killed by the aforementioned Kitiara. And I would say that this worked. It did what a good heroic sacrifice kind of should do, I think, which is that it descended slowly, but with a sinking sort of inevitability, there's no way to avoid this. This cannot be stopped, And I was very glad actually that nothing kind of stepped in and Deus Ex Machina Sturm out of there at the last second. He faced his death like a man, and his death occurred. What is kind of funny in a slightly sad way is that as far as I could tell, his heroic sacrifice literally didn't slow the blue dragons down for even 1 minute, and the proceeding dragon orb possession of the dragons by Laurana probably would have gone exactly the same way if Sturm had just followed Laurana and Tasselhoff down into the tunnels, right? So basically what I'm saying is that Sturm Brightblade died bravely. Sturm Brightblade died heroically. Sturm Brightblade died honorably. And Sturm Brightblade died for fucking nothing. But to put it a little bit coldly and clinically, Sturm's death does kind of clean the group up a little bit. We have less to deal with now, particularly with Goldmoon and Riverwind, shunted down to bit player status, which could change, but not really here so much. And Flint Fireforge just kind of being the token dwarf sidekick. There's a reason I barely mentioned or alluded to him at all in this whole review. But I feel like that makes our main players now as we go into Book 3. Dragons of Spring Dawning, Tanis Half Elven, the twins, Raistlin and Caramon, Laurana, all kind of versus Kitiara, with Tasselhoff and Fizzbon being kind of the wild card players off to the side. But I'll get to reading Spring Dawning soon enough, and finally find out what this trilogy is really about. Some must be close to 30 years now since first seeing it on a bookshelf as a little kid, and thinking it looked enticing. But once that truth is revealed to me, I will report back with another review right here on Zio's Book Club, where, like I said, it's just freezing. This winter night is getting me down, man. Thanks for hanging out with me here on the book club, and now I gotta go get warm. All right, peace out, everyone.